Hi, my name is Benedict. This is Series 2 and it's Episode 3 in the Simple Songwriting series. We have finished Falling Down in Love. I hope you have watched Episodes 1 and 2 of this. In number 1, I started and I wrote a verse section, which is this area, and I really didn't have much further direction. I had a lesson plan and we would have come out with a complete song, but then Jake very kindly stepped in and supplied a song. He wrote that just overnight and gave us a performance as well, which changed what I was doing, but boy, has it been worth it. And Episode 2 showed you how we worked that up from being just this verse to a full song so that it integrates with the lyric, and the really important part of putting in a lot of the little details which make a song come alive far more than if you just loop, loop, finish, which I hear too much of and is a real killer when you're working with a song and it just somebody hasn't put in the time and the energy to make it special. And that's the whole thing. People want to feel special. So we ended up with a gorgeous song, which I'll play to you. This is the final mix of this. And then I'll walk you through some of the things that I've learnt and I want you to hear and understand to help you when you get to this stage as well. So Jake Cropley, Falling Down in Love.
Love is on my mind. It bleeds me from inside, then leaves me out to dry. I think about it still, the passion and the thrill of climbing up that hill to something I can feel, a place to call my own. Days I find like the rain, I'm falling down, always falling down in love. Take me in your arms and lead me with your charms. You shelter me from harm, but then it goes away, and every word we say turns us into a play, like actors on a stage. Then everything is gone. Days I find like the rain, I'm falling down, always falling down in love. But sometimes
Jake Cropley, Falling Down in Love, words and performance by Jake, and I actually get some credit here because I wrote the centre of the song, and obviously its performances, even though they were VST. This is how you can create a song. And while if you're new to this, you might think, geez, that was a lot of work. You know what? It actually kind of wasn't. I'll ask you, if you're still a little bemused, go back to episode 1, look at this section, and then how it's been extrapolated. The reason this seems so magical is because we've got really good lyric and a very nice performance. Now, there are actually some issues with this performance. There are some issues with notes, not necessarily being the right notes. Whether that's Jake or myself, don't know. We haven't sat down to work that out. There's also a little bit of distortion at times in the vocal. Not at all uncommon with a quick recording of a vocal, especially if using one of them fancy condenser microphones. They look very pretty, like Elvis or Sinatra used that microphone, but they are not forgiving when you get a little too excited. Now, I raise these to say, yes, I'm aware of them, but also to say, this is how I've handled them. I've gone as far as I can in any given, reasonable given period of time, and then said, I will move on with what I've got. Now, the reason that is such an important attitude to take is that if you take the, oh, well, I can't do it because it's not perfect, I'll wait till I get a gold-plated microphone and I'll wait till everything is everybody's idea of perfect, is you'll never finish your thing. And it's super important. When we look back at seminal works in, let's just say rock and roll, from the sort of early 50s on, there was very much an attitude of, oh, that's what we've got, we'll go with it, and we'll make the most of it. There are a lot of funny things in recordings. If you really listen closely, you can go, oh, that's pretty odd. But they work so well, we've often just accepted them as being the way it was meant to be. Often they were failings. But rather than let it get in the way, they said, this is what we got, overall this is magical, and they went with it. And because of that, it often is more magical than things where people have focused so obsessively on perfection. If you are beginning, and that's probably what you are if you're watching this, then perfection is not a thing that you are realistically going to achieve. I bet if we spoke to any legendary songwriter, Willie Nelson, a guy who can just write songs in his sleep, and probably worse, and Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, Richard Carpenter of the Carpenters. He didn't necessarily write songs, but the way he arranged them, he was legendary. Any of those kinds of guys, Bjorn and Benny from ABBA, nothing is ever perfect. They could look at, say, Dancing Queen, their single biggest song, and go, yeah, we failed with that and that and that and that and that. Do we care? No. So, as a beginner, perfection must go off your plate. Does this work, is your question. Is this workable? What we have here works. Thank you. Thank you again. And this is really important. That's part of why I've got almost 100 published projects. You can stop now. Thank you. I've got almost 100 published projects because I go, okay, that's as good as I can get right now, and I move along. So this is really a demo. If we were to want to push this song further, which we might, we've discussed probably doing this, then we would be replacing all these awfully mechanical acoustic and electric guitars. Jake would be playing them because he's going to do a way better job, and he's going to rise and fall with the song. But we're going to go with what we've got, so it's finishing it off, and that's part of the lesson for today, for this video, is to say, get to the point where that's the best you can do, and then finish it, and finish it with pride. A few of the other things, some of the challenges that I faced. One of the challenges was that this vocal was incredibly dynamic. And that's great, but the verses were really quiet, and the choruses got really loud. And that's hard to mix because it doesn't work very well in Radioland. People don't listen with this much dynamic range in Radioland. They're listening with a small dynamic range. So I took the quieter sections and turned them up by 6 or even 8 dB. I took the mid sections, turned them up by less, and in the loud sections I turned them down a little bit. What I was looking for was not to make them all exactly the same, because that would be a massive rookie error. To make things exactly the same, vanilla sausage, nobody needs that. This is still a dynamic song, it has to rise. But I've evened it out a little bit, and that makes it easier to listen to, therefore easier to mix. That was the number one thing, to get that even. Then I had to work out, well, how am I going to mix this? This is a bit of a tricky one. Despite being quite simple, it's an incredibly powerful delivery, and I've got to be able to do this justice. And while I hear plenty of people who are, oh yes, I'm great at mixing, approaching things and just applying rules, those mixes have no beauty in them. And it was important to me that this bring out all the beauty of this song, because it's great. So, as is common for me, I said, okay, where's this going to live? And the obvious answer to me was, this is a lot like a Roy Orbison song. So I chose an arbitrary date of, say, about 1964 and said, how do I make this work? And that is, I set up the sound stage in which we were working. And that is here, in the reverb sends. I'm not going to go through all the details of mixing, but this is a key factor in how the mix is made. If we scoot back, hear how that echoes out. A lot of that's got to do with these. Let's just take them out of the mix. Love is on my mind. Jake suddenly feels like he's up my nose, and overall everything's horribly dry. It's lacking beauty. My aim was to say, okay, if this was recorded in 1964, how would it have been recorded? How did they achieve that sound? Not technically, although we've got to think in terms of technicality. They'd moved past all the guys standing around one microphone in the middle of the room, but they were still commonly recording most, if not all, of the session in one go. The core of it was at least in one go, so you had all the players in the room. They were probably moved further apart with some dividers in between them to help a little bit with separation for everybody's unique mics and what have you. But it was still in the room, and they were still capturing the room, which means there's vast amounts of bleed and spill everywhere. Every instrument recording had every other instrument in it. But you ended up with a wonderful sound. And so the aim was to recreate some of that feel. So I used 2 reverbs to do this, both of my own. Let's just press the keep open button. These are on send buses, so everything is going to these. The first one is this guy. Love is on my mind. It bleeds me from inside. Hear how it really fills out excuse me, really fills out the voice and the instrumentation. It just adds a richness. Then leaves me out to dry. And I hear plenty of mixes done by people that are just like this. I think about it. It's compressed, but there's no beauty. The other is this, which is a funny one. It's a collection of delays. I've got videos on these if you want to investigate them a little bit more. Love. It's the combination of these two sounds is on my mind. It bleeds me from, which gives us this feeling of this being in a room, probably with some extra treatment from very early reverberation or echo devices, And we get this very live feel that's rich and full. Yes, you can hear individual taps and what have you, but when you listen back to a lot of those early recordings, they were very rich in terms of the room, and that's a lot of where the beauty comes from. So the first thing before you get too far into mixing is decide, where is this going to happen? I keep talking about that, but I see people who don't do it, and their mixes sound strange as a result. Note again that both of these reverb spaces are unique. There's another mix, which will be the next video that comes out, Song of Doom, where I was struggling in part with that mix because I was using a stock reverb unit. And the problem was that it was so smooth and so perfect, it was just muddying up the mix. I had to deperfectify it to give myself some of the character of that kind of sound and feel. So really important. Put some time and energy, remember it's detail, time and energy into the space in which you're going to make your song, your piece, appear to be. And in this case, I've said, okay, I'm going to create this real 1964 type space or feel. And if you need to, go research it. Go look at those rooms. Go work out how they did these things. Not so that you can apply an impulse response and say, there you go, that's it, but to create this thing so that it's really unique. So that gives us our overall sound, which really emphasizes that vocal. Once the vocal was done, we'll just pop it in solo.
Think about it, passion and the thrill.
Now I allow that to be super reverby. I know that some of that is going to appear to disappear once we've got the mix in. So don't worry if you're working in solo. I've worked from the vocal down. We'll mute him for now. It's then a case of building up his band around him. So we've started with the rhythm section. I know what's happened. Fall for this every time. Skip. This guy you've got to switch back on again. I don't use it very often. I probably should buy it. I use it often enough to give him a donation for it. It's well worth it. Now, I had some difficulties with this, I really did, and that was because I'd made what I thought were mixed decisions. Despite saying to you, do not make your mixed decisions when you're composing, I'd made some decisions which I thought, oh, well, these are going to carry through to the mix, and they were wrong. Really wrong. So don't make your mixed decisions early because you're going to stick to them, and then they'll cause you to really struggle. I had to keep leaving the room and coming back and leaving the room and coming back and to try to clear my head, and eventually I realized what I needed to clear was not my head, but was my expectation of decisions that I'd made early on about how this mix was going to sound. They were wrong. So what I had was my electric guitar and bass playing in the same arena, because my electric guitar, and this is partly because I had put my electric guitar part in before my bass, was that it was basically playing a bass line. I haven't changed any notes, but the way that I had set up and expected my thought process on that sound were that it was basically playing a bass line, and then I could not get them to separate. No matter what I did, they wouldn't separate. So be very, very careful. Once I got over that, suddenly it became much clearer, but there were a few other things where I had made similar decisions. So I went into the drums, and I had to give each of these a separate carrot, because remember I've got 2 drum lines. Initially, this drum had all its bass and everything, and then I realized that's a real problem because it's actually playing first fiddle when it was always second fiddle. So I got rid of elements that, while they sounded great on their own, served no great purpose in the mix, especially seeing they fought in the mix. Main drums. I actually swapped the snare at this point to a side stick. You're getting some snare through the drum machine, but it's far more in keeping with the performance and helping to differentiate and help it to rise as this drummer swaps between side and snare. So a little change got made there. But the whole idea was to make this work as a unit. And the problem, as I said, with the electric guitar, because it was very bassy, it was trying to make a bass line and they were fighting with each other. So I lifted a lot of the bottom end out of that and changed its whole profile, actually completely reamped it, which is part of why if you send stems to somebody or even recording yourself, don't necessarily just record the amp sound, record your DI, record your guitar clean, because in this situation, the amping that I'd given that guitar was wrong. And yes, I could have changed it, fixed it, and mixed with EQ and what have you, but it was not as wouldn't have been as successful as simply going, pull it out, reamp it, as in get in there, set up the guitar amp in a way that suits the actual needs of the song. And then I was able to get very clear separation between bass and that electric guitar sound. That was a problem, and I struggled a lot with it. But once I realized that it was from faulty logic deciding things that I've even told you don't decide these things, then I was free to move forward. Electric piano is fairly simple. Again, I had to make that a lot brighter, because while electric piano sounds nice and warm solo, as soon as you put it in a mix, it'll muddy everything up. So don't be afraid to whoop off the bottom. Guitars, initially I went very bright with these fellas. Mistake. I'd always worked on the assumption they were going to be really bright, almost more like country guitars, but no, they needed to sit more in the middle. It turns out it wasn't really an acoustic-led song because it's a Jake-led song. So they needed to be there, but they needed to be a little bit warmer rather than bright and brittle. And the string, that just needed a lot of filling out. So when we get into... Oh, I also had to fade it in over time as it comes in. When it first comes in, if you go back to the last episode, you'll find it's just too loud. I always knew it was too loud, but just needed to find a point where we faded it in. So in terms of filling in the sound is just echoes, fair amount of reverb and some more delays just to really fill that out and make it feel a lot smoother and richer. We want to smooth off those beginnings. The beginnings tend to be a bit too hard. That's one of the problems with samples, especially when you don't do any dynamic modulation with them, is that they can feel too hard. Adding several layers of echoes and what have you tends to smooth that off, partly because you've got the last thing running across it, and partly because you're just allowing yourself to have that sound build a little bit more because you've got the initial strike of it and then you've got all your delays coming in as well. So it creates a volume ramp for each of the notes as they begin. So that was the work getting the string in, but I was still honestly struggling. Once I'd got to here, the mix was starting to work. I then went back and had a listen to some Roy. And when you listen to early Roy, you will find a lot of the very interesting mix decisions that were made at that time. There was no sort of, this is where you put things. Every mix engineer solved the problems as he saw them, which is exactly how it should be. And that's why you get such interesting mixes out of those earlier periods. There were plenty of tracks where half of the material was on one speaker, the other half of the material was on the other speaker, including some vocals, like backing vocals, his doo-wop stuff. And some of them, there was just a hole right down the middle. You sit in the stereo, because I sit right in the stereo here, and there was just a hole, a black hole in the middle. until he sung. And what that did was so clearly focused on Roy's voice. And with good reason. And I wanted some of that feel here because this is about Jake and his voice and this song. I didn't want to go completely sort of Beatles all on one side, all on the other side. But there was a big lesson in that. And also the way that some of the more stereo across the whole field mixes were made was quite different from the way things is done in formula now. Initially when working, yes, I'd got the formula with my 2 acoustic guitars panned left and right and my chug in the middle. And as I said already, that was causing problems because it was trying to pretend to be a bass line, which honestly I had kind of thought when I was making it, which was just stupid. This is why you shouldn't think these things. So I said, okay, let's completely revise how this goes. So in terms of stereo, close that up now, we can have a look at this. If we look at our faders, I left the main drums in the center. But I narrowed my whole rhythm section down. Easy to think, oh, the more stereo, the better. No. This isn't about drums, it's about Jake. So I've pulled those down to halfway. So there's still some stereo in that kit, but it's by narrowing it down, it allows Jake to be out here. That makes him seem even bigger. As I heard someone else say recently, and I mentioned it before, if everything in the mix is stereo, your mix is not stereo. And you might go, huh? But of course everything's stereo. No, his logic is great. Because if everything in your mix is out here, effectively nothing is out here. You've got no sense of, where are my hands? You've got no sense of how you're controlling what's where, because everything is out here, pinned left and right. Some things are mono and one thing is is stereo. That's going to leap out as being stereo. Your record will appear broader from choosing how wide each thing is and where it is. So going back to that, narrowed the drums down. Our little E-drum section, I moved right over to the side. Now, bear in mind, we have narrowed this down, so in reality it doesn't sound over there. But by doing this, we've made it less important, but made more space, not only for the main drum kit, but just overall, it doesn't muddy the mix up as much. The bass is in the middle too, but by narrowing it down, we've really focused where those things are going to be, leaving a lot more space for what we're going to put out on the sides. So then I went to the guitars and said, okay, what am I going to do with these guys? Let's pick just guitars. Having my acoustics and my electric was not working. It was not in keeping with what was happening here. So I said, okay, that's fine. Let's just spread them out another way. I needed to get that electric off sitting on top of the bass. So I moved it out to the one side. I put my acoustic guitars across this side. So as you'll see, one of them's panned out a bit, or a fair bit. I rarely pan to 100%. And the other one a certain way. So I'm using up this sort of quadrant over on the side, saying, okay, this bit over on the side, that's where my acoustic guitars really get to have their space. And then I've put the electric out on the other side. It gets it away from becoming one with the bass. And we've now got movement between these three. It's more stereo as a result. It's a nicer result to me than the left, right, down the middle. Lack of thinking didn't work. A little bit of thinking gave us a really nice result. Now with the vocals,
is gone. Days I find life.
That's now gotten those guitars out of his way. It's given us not all of, but some of that hole down the middle for the singer. And that's a good thing for me. The piano and the string, I've also moved off over to that side there, where the electric is. By moving things as much as I have here, no, again, they're not 100% out, I find that an uncomfortable way of doing things. We've created quite a bit of space in the middle, but we've also created quite a bit of space for all these instruments. It's not a formula space, it's an interesting space. So we've decided, well, what function are these instruments playing, and move them left, right. I've talked about that in another video on basic mixing, and that's what I've done here. I've said, okay, what are we really doing? That's what we need to do. This is how they're going to tell their story. So once we put it all back together,
and every word we say turns us into a play, like actors on a stage.
we've got a clear sense of all those instruments. We don't necessarily hear them as panned out. We hear them together, just like when you think of a Roy Orbison song. You don't think of the panning. You just hear it as a blob of the Roy Orbison song. That's how you should be hearing this as well. If you're hearing it as, oh, look, here's acoustic guitars here and electric guitars there, then you're probably not listening to the song, and I feel sorry for you. I'm asking you to do some of that, but ultimately you should be listening to the song as a whole, and it provides a nice balance. Is this the perfect mix? Who knows? Who cares? I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is, does it show the material? I think it shows the material really very nicely, but don't be afraid when you're coming to do your mix, rather than going, oh, but this is the... It probably won't work for you. As you see, it marched me into a dead end here by actually realizing that those modern rules really are they're a pain in the ass. I then gave myself the freedom to step outside of that, and I gave myself a working mix really quite quickly, and I wasted hours because of false assumptions from the beginning, of thinking in my head how it was going to be mixed from the beginning, and then following formulas, even though I'm the guy who rails against them. But once I separated out and gave myself freedom from that, the mix just fell together, and I got the result that I wanted. And that is, I think we've got a beautiful sounding song that carries a lot of the feel of those early recordings in its openness, in its charm. Whether we end up finishing the song into a more complete form with more effort, more takes on everything, doesn't matter. This is done, and I am delighted with it, and I hope Jake is as well. I believe he is. He should be damn proud of himself, because it's a gorgeous song, especially for the time input that went into it. So that ends this series, because we've got our finished song. We started with a chord progression, we got a song, thanks Jake, and then we spread it all out and then worked out how to actually present what we've got in terms of a mix. Any questions? Ask them down below. If you're looking to work with me or Jake and haven't tracked Jake down, ask down below. We're here to help you get your story told. You have a good day now.